Welcome back, everyone, to Random Thoughts, Mythgard Musings Edition. You thought you might have gotten away, huh? It's been a minute. It's been a minute since we talked some Mythgard, but there's actually some exciting news in the world of Mythgard. We're getting a balance patch. Who would have thought it? There were rumors about this way back, and then it was kind of always lurking around and wondering, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Now that everything's in maintenance mode, are we still going to get it? Where is this going to turn out? Where is it going to show up? But ultimately, we are getting one, and there are some pretty spicy changes. So let's jump into it. As mentioned, there's a lot of different changes. There's actually more than I honestly was expecting when I saw that there was a balance patch. I kind of went in and said, okay, they're going to change a couple things, but there's 13 changes and fairly significant ones. Now, this order doesn't quite match exactly what is in the patch notes, but that's okay. We're just going to go through them, give a little thoughts, some hot takes, see where we end up. I'm very curious to see what the community thinks. Let me know down in the comments if you have other thoughts, what you thought about the balance patch. Does this change things? Does it matter? Does it draw you back in if you were giving Mythgard up? Let me know what you think. But let's jump into the changes themselves. The first one up is actually a path change. It's Turn of Seasons. So we're going from starting with 2 extra life back down to 1. We'll read the statement here, which is, after the last pass at starting life totals for paths, wow, that's a tough sentence to say, most look to be in a better spot. Turn of Seasons was moved from +1 to +2 in that patch in anticipation of the impact of other life total changes. It's overperforming at 2, so we're putting it back to 1. And I think this makes sense. Turn of Seasons definitely felt like it was pushing it. I don't know if it necessarily needed this change. I mean, I obviously don't see the numbers. The numbers I would expect are, well, probably influenced a little bit by the population at this stage, but I didn't mention this earlier. Mythgard still seems to be doing okay. It's not, you're not waiting 45 minutes for a game. It seems to be pretty snappy from what we've seen on stream the last few times that I've played it. But does this make sense? Yeah, I can kind of get behind this. Turns seem to be the de facto choice. Given the previous nerfs to Safe House and things, it's just kind of pushed itself up the tier list, and now it's the de facto option. So I'm okay with this. I don't think it's really a big problem either way. But next one up, we have a change to a card that, I mean, did anybody see this one coming? I did not expect any changes to Arcane Over. So the change here is Arcane Over was launched in a weaker state due to how potentially large it gets. We found that to not be the case in practice, and will move some additional power into the initial body. So it's going from a 6'3 to a 6'5", 4/5, which is a pretty significant body. That's pretty relevant. It should dodge a few breakpoints, and of course, I expect it to basically come down at least. That was a strange way to create that sentence, but at least a 7/6, because presumably you're not just going to slam it out there. Now, a 7/6 warded is a pretty threatening body, and it's interesting that this card's getting some love. If I recall correctly, this was one of the initially spoiled cards, like way back when Winter War was merely a twinkle in everyone's eye. This is pretty cool. It's something that I had played around with. One of the concerns I'd have going forward is the orange-purple warded deck, primarily built around White Moon Arena. Why am I concerned about that? Well, that deck can feel super oppressive if they find the White Moon Arena. And one of the challenges with that particular build was always having enough relevant bodies either to be put on the arena and survive, just because they're large enough, or in this case, they're warded, so they dodge the drawback of doing the dueling, the arena, the gladiatorial combat, however you want to look at it. I mean, arena probably makes the most sense, White Moon Arena, but anyway. It dodges all of that because of the warded. That's where I was trying to originally find a home for this, but the fact of the matter is that previously, it was just kind of hot garbage with as low of a backside as it did. Now, this thing's pretty dangerous in and of itself. Now this deck might be doing things. It might be doing things on its own. Whether we'll see it or not is another story. I did see a bunch of people running around with White Moon Arena decks not long after the maintenance mode announcement, so I could certainly see this buoying that archetype, but also because of the substantial body, it may show up elsewhere. So let's move on to the next one. Next one is one that people probably anticipated something was going to get changed if I had told them, hey, there's a balance patch coming. Give me your top 3 cards that are getting changed. I could see this showing up in some of those lists. Maybe not all of them. Maybe it would have been made number 4, but whatever. Without digressing too much, let's talk about Arctic Pyre. So Arctic Pyre, like Knoll of Conquest, represents a bit too much power for Rainbow's End decks. While we do enjoy the cards we can create when doing enchantments that spam minions on Awaken, we're reining each of these back in just a bit. I think one of the worst kept secrets in Mythgard was that Arctic Pyre and Knoll of Conquest were bonkers. Now, they're bonkers within the realm of Mythgard, so let's face it, just about everything in Mythgard is bonkers, which was part of the fun. It's a big draw for me personally and a number of other people that you can do some of these absolutely incredible things in Mythgard. But the fact of the matter is that Arctic Pyre allowed you to cheat things a little bit too much. And this was actually a suggestion that I had on my list, and I was hoping that would get implemented at some point. It's just that Rainbow decks are a problem. And I still think that Rainbow as a whole, and also by extension Allfather's Horn, are problematic. But making this sort of change helps ease the burden for opponents here, where you can't just, oh, well, I'll blue on 1 and then off color on 2, whatever, whether that's yellow, whether that's orange, whether it's whatever, and then just keep rolling. Or you can Leprechaun's Coin this out on 1 and then follow it up with another one. Or, you know, cheat costs that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to because you can chain a number of enchantments with Rainbow's End. And this, because it only required 1 blue previously, allowed you to do a bunch of things that you might not be able to. Things that could happen on turn 3 now happen on turn 4. Things that could happen on turn 5 now happen on turn 6. That may not sound like a lot, but a 1-turn difference, especially within the scope of Mythgard, is an eternity. It can really make the difference between winning and losing. I think this is a positive change. But we'll move on from there and talk about Comb Trader, which is another card that I don't think people would have said is getting a change. Let's face it, Comb Trader is not a... was about to say it's not a popular card, but I think that it is. It's just... let's just face it, it's not very good. Or wasn't. Now it's going from a 2-5 to a 2-6. And that's kind of a big deal. Does that breakpoint matter? Well, yes. It obviously is more sturdy. Let's talk about what was actually stated. Giving Comb Trader an extra health should make it a bit stickier and more likely you can live your item flinging dream more than once. Currently, with the 2-5 version, I think this just comes down on the combo finish turn. Post-change, I'm not sure that really changes, at least not initially. It's still a single minion. It could still die to a billion things. There's still a number of ways that could be removed in and out of combat or just made irrelevant. I don't think you're just running this out there and exposing it. You're probably playing it in conjunction with a second one on the same turn while you have a gajillion items in hand, which we'll come back to later. But one other thing that I'd throw in here is I'm not super excited about the play pattern that this encourages. Ramen got a nerf way back when because, at least in my opinion, I don't remember offhand the officially stated reasons, but basically because of Disc Smite. And really because of Smite, but Disc is a big component. If you assume that's true, we're now loading everything into that thing? Like, it just... the burn finish is... it's not just difficult to contend with, it's also a problem because of the... difficult to contend with because you can't do anything about it because it comes out of hand. That's the big issue, is that your opponent can just set this stuff up. You may even know it's coming, but your only realistic response is, I need to end the game before they do it. Which maybe, given that it's items, like, let's face it, items haven't exactly made the biggest splash in the world. Maybe it's fine, but it's a weird play pattern to encourage. This is the same sort of thing that I felt was a problem, continues to be a problem with the Spirit decks, where A lot of people find burn frustrating. Now, when it's a combo burn, I feel like that's even going to compound and exacerbate the existing negative feelings about it. But, again, items. Like, are we really that worried? I've seen some mean things happen, though, so I don't want to overstate the idea that, it's not a big deal, because it might be. We'll have to see. I know I want to build item builds, but this isn't really the item build that I wanted. This is not the payoff I wanted. I wanted to build, do unique things, and by unique things, I mean have flexibility in my gameplay because of the items I found, and then use things like Cyber Minotaur to maintain the board, establish the board, comboing my opponent out from, 20-something. It's not a game plan that I really want to go towards, but it is what we have. So let's jump into the next one. I think that's all I have to say about Comb Trader. Next one up is Iku Torso, which is something that I think has been on a lot of people's lists, not mine, for nerfs for a long time. I've maintained this for a while. Iku is very good, don't get me wrong, and this is going to come across, and I'm sure I'll get roasted, but I didn't think Iku was ever on the power level of a number of the other game finishers. It just always felt, okay, I got a big dummy, which is good. It has overrun, it pushes for a lot of damage, and, oh, by the way, it kind of functions as removal. Plus setting up the kill and blah, blah, blah. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to undersell this. Iku Torso is very, very good. But I always felt Stag was better until the nerf, and even then, Stag is okay, well, I'm getting card advantage, plus I'm getting the overrun, a similarly sized body. It protects itself. I mean, Iku kind of does, but it's, there are a lot of different factors where I just felt that Iku personally was a tier below a lot of the comparable options. But regardless, Iku is very strong, and a lot of people felt that it was problematic. So Iku is a pretty large body for 7 mana, so we're pushing it to 8 to slow down the power curve of Draenei top end a bit. And I think this makes sense. While I was going through this whole argument just a moment ago about trying to say, it's not that big a deal, don't worry about it. What are we nerfing this for? I do agree with the idea of setting these watermarks where, okay, look, the game used to end on turn 7 or 6 or whatever through the various nerfs of the different cards. Now, it's one turn later, and we've all talked about at great length, myself included, the struggles that aggro has in the game. Now, is Iku really what you're looking for against aggro? Well, it can be. It can be. But often you're digging for other tools to make sure you get to the Iku turn, and that kind of locks the game up because it, they have one threat that they needed to, that's how they're going to close the game out. They just need one more turn. Lock it down with Iku, and then you've stabilized, that sort of thing. Now it's pushing it back a turn, which I think is important. Again, just like we were talking about with other cards, the previous watermark was just one turn faster, and a turn can be... It's difficult to overstate, the magnitude of one turn in Mythgard. You can make that argument about other games, but in Mythgard, it feels particularly sharp when you go, I needed this one turn sooner, or my opponent whiffed that turn, bang, game's over. They needed to do this, now I can translate this tempo advantage into long-term gains and eventually take the game down, or if you're an aggressive deck, close the game out. So I think this is positive in the grand scope of pushing aggro, pushing control back, aggro forward, which I guess thematically makes sense, whatever. That didn't really quite segue the way I wanted to, but I can get behind the Iku change. This makes sense to me logically. Now, after Iku, we have Knoll of Conquest. Talked about Pyre earlier, but Knoll is also getting a nerf. As stated above, just removing a bit of power from Pyre and Knoll and moving the damage deal to face should make it a little less likely you have to contest this every time it's played. And I would agree. It's fascinating that a 2/3 represented so much damage. Now, I think that this one, compared to the Pyre, possibly could have gone one step further. Maybe another minor stat change to the Carl itself, maybe change focus to Slayer, something like that. But I think ultimately reducing the damage that this presents is significant. We've all had games where you had cleared the board and then your opponent just slams Knoll something, because it was mid to late game. They already had existing enchantments, potentially other Knolls, and then just went, oops, now I'm representing like other double-digit sets of damage post-Misanthropia, post-whatever. Or even just early in the game, it's you must respect this thing, because it's 3 damage from the attack and then 2 from not contesting it. That's a lot of damage that could go through. Having it in this way is going to probably shave anywhere from, I mean, obviously 1 to 5 to 7 damage. Like, it couldn't matter. If it's 7, you've obviously taken a number of hits from it, or most likely, but now you could actually have the decision point of, I want to block on the corners instead of directly in front because of reasons. And it might be valid. Whereas before, there was virtually no excuse to be playing on the corners. You often could not sustain the damage because it just added up. That chip damage will get you and bring you into Allfather's Horn range, which essentially all of this comes back to. Because as the Rainbow deck, it's, okay, can I hit that threshold? All I need to do is get them into low 20s. All I need to do is get them into mid 20s and sometimes high 20s or 30s if you get really bonkers things. And it could be very early in the game. Now, it, again, extends that timeline, gives your opponent more breathing room, or you, if your opponent is playing Rainbow, time to get your defenses in order. You could actually afford to potentially take a hit here. Whether that will actually be true, we'll have to see. But right now, it looks promising, so I can get behind the Knoll change. Next up is Lamp of Wonders, which, similar to previous cards, if you ask me, well, what cards are going to get a change? Well, this, that, and this. Lamp of Wonders would have been like card 300. I don't know. I probably wouldn't have even remembered this card, to be perfectly honest. I do see it a lot, or did see it a lot on ladder, and I think I've seen it in some of the opens, but regardless, this card I think is pretty solid before, and now it's getting pushed. Like, it's not unreasonable. So this change is particularly exciting. Lamp of Wonders was definitely not a weak card before, but wasn't really showing up outside of Rainbow's end decks. We think this, in conjunction with a change we're making to Notarize Reality, could make for some neat use for Lamp outside of Rainbow decks, while also still giving some help to Rainbow decks affected by the nerfs to Arctic Pyre and Knoll of Conquest. I think that's an admirable goal, and it's definitely very interesting. I would have been very concerned without the nerfs to Pyre and Knoll. Lamp was showing up in Rainbow decks, as mentioned, regardless. And I think that it certainly will show up post. I mean, it's only 1 deck slot. It is a mythic, so yeah, are you going to find it? But it essentially guarantees you're drawing 2 cards a turn for a few turns. This notably doesn't have durability. Your opponent is going to be limited in ways to remove it. Giving it to your opponent is whatever. Like, they have to find it and have an interval to play it and be able to leverage it. Like, don't get me wrong. Divination 4 or 5 in this case is strong. But it's still divination. It's not card draw, unless you have something else to leverage with it. And depending on your opponent's deck, they may just not have a window to do this. It's only 2 mana, so odds are they will. But there's the potential. I definitely like this idea. We'll talk about the Notarize Reality and come back to Lamp in that context momentarily. But I like this. I generally like the idea of pushing some of these other cards and giving them a chance for the limelight. I don't know if Lamp would have been on my list ahead of other ones, but it's pretty cool that it's going to see some play. Or certainly more play than it was previously. So next one up is Mirror Pack, one that I am excited about because, again, item builds. This one's going from a 3 cost down to a 2 cost. Still keeping its gem requirement, but this change is not going to affect when Mirror Pack is played, but will give you 1 extra mana for aforementioned item flinging dreams. As you can tell in the patch notes, it was physically closer than where I have it here. It's still going to do the same thing. It's still going to give you a bunch of items, but it does create, talking about Comb Trader here primarily, an easier wombo turn where you go Comb Trader, Mirror, or Mirror Pack, Comb Trader sort of thing. Or I guess you could play the Mirror Pack afterwards. It doesn't matter because it's when the items are played, but you get the idea. It allows you to squeeze it in with turns, which again, when we were talking about earlier cards that get moved back, now we're moving cards forward, where this potentially crazy turn happens a turn sooner. Is that what item decks needed? I think it's certainly helpful. I honestly don't really like running Mirror Pack, but I think it's required. And 3 is just kind of clunky. It just doesn't quite get there. Now you can set up an earlier Cyber Minotaur turn to try and clear the board, assuming your opponent played into it. And a number of other potential combos, obviously the aforementioned Comb Trader. But I like this change. Items were an archetype that could certainly use some assistance. So I can get behind this. It makes sense, I think. Now, after that, we get to Notary Reality, which is, of course, the one we mentioned just a couple cards ago. Now, Notary Reality is going from 2 and an orange to 1 and an orange. Making Notary Reality to 1, or excuse me, moving Notary Reality to 1 is a little scary. We have this dream where some new aggro strategies around using Notarize on 1 to hit a buff minion on 2 could open up some playability for some otherwise lesser played 2-drops. This is one we'll be keeping a close eye on and we'll follow up on if needed. I have a lot of thoughts about this. I'm going to try and keep it as short as I possibly can because everybody out there knows me and rambling. Notary Reality is cool. It's cool because it interacts with in a way that you just can't really do in physical card games. I mean, you could make something like this, but it's difficult. It leverages a lot of the advantages of being a digital game. I think that's pretty awesome. I think there's some flexibility. Occasionally making the top 6 cards of their deck ephemeral will, once in a blue moon, be relevant. As a result, you get, a little bit of modality here as compared to really focusing on the bottom part of it. But realistically, that's the part that matters. And giving the top 6 minions of a friendly deck +1/+1 and Zealot permanently is pretty significant. Why? It's not just the +1/+1, which does matter. So this now potentially causes things on curve to break rules that they couldn't before. Not necessarily become broken, but break rules. That ghoul that was a 2/3 is now a 3/4. Does that matter? Yeah. Now it lives through Crucible Flare. It used to live through Ignition but died to Crucible Flare. Now it survives both. And that can be pretty significant because now, depending on your opponent, they must invest further cards into dealing with things. Things that were X2 before now are X3s. So they live through an Ignition. And so on down the line. Your X4s survive through Wings. All of this matters. You won't know exactly unless, you're divining or something, but 6 is a not insignificant amount of minions. And depending on your build, it could very easily be just the top 6 cards of your deck. Granted, if you're orange, you're probably running Ready for Anything, and then you could whiff and blah, 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 but odds are you're going to hit probably a significant amount of minions, like a sizable amount. And that's kind of a big deal. All those times that you Ready for Anything something, yes, you don't get the warded, you don't get the armor, but you're hitting more things, and it doesn't require that they're actively in your hand now. It's also only a 1 cost, which is way easier to sneak in than a 2 cost. On a random turn. Oh, well, I'm going to play this stuff and then I'll Notary Reality. Just for good measure. But I mentioned earlier that the +1/+1 is not the only part. And that's absolutely true because the Zealot tribe matters for a lot of things. Immediately, one of the things in my head is Xerxian Sympathizer. So you could play Rebels. Play basically a Rebel deck. And now just turn those Rebels into Zealots? Seems okay. It seems okay, and they get the Zealot and +1/+1 permanently. So it's not going to get wiped when they get bounced or returned to deck or they get brought back with Journey or whatever. It's going to be on there permanently, and you're going to have these additional triggers. So everybody starts searching through their collection for things that say, when you play a Zealot, if you control a Zealot, when a Zealot does this, when a Zealot does that. There might be a few other gems in there, but I'm interested to see where this goes. I don't know. This is, I guess, the walk back the excitement a little bit. It is still a buff that, you're setting up for future things. It's not giving you immediate value, so that's obviously not as great. It also could potentially introduce some swingy things, which is what it's alluded to here in the description or what I read off earlier. We'll have to see how it plays out. I'm excited to see how this works out. There's some comments in some of the other orange cards that I agree that there were certain orange archetypes that were lacking. But I don't know that I necessarily buy into the idea that orange as a whole, like we saw orange decks. Maybe they weren't orange decks, as in they just happen to feature orange as opposed to being an orange deck. I'm thinking, say, blue, orange, rainbow, for example. It was an All Father's Horn rainbow deck, and primarily most of the stuff was blue, but the orange components were relevant. You couldn't quite do that in other colors. You'd had to jump into or jump through other hoops. We'll have to see how this plays out. I'm very excited to see where Notary Reality ends up. Now, the next one up is, again, something that, who the hell was thinking of this card? But somebody was thinking of Sanguine Steel, because it's now getting a buff by reducing its cost from 7 to 6, keeping the gem requirement. Moving Terminal Calculus to 7, spoiler alert, left a gap in the curve that we decided to fill by moving Sanguine Steel down. We don't expect this to make the card significantly better, but it now might be worth thinking about. Sanguine Steel, I don't think, was on anybody's radar other than somebody intentionally trying to, meme. I want to run some Mythgard stuff. Sanguine Steel is your card. Well, one of your cards anyway. Do I care about this thing? Not really. I still think I don't care. I mean, a 6-3 with Agile and Life Tap is pretty dangerous, but it A, assumes you have a board, B, assumes your opponent not going to clear that board, or that you're not making your board worse. I don't know. Great. It got buffed. I think we're going to move on. Next one up is Shimmer on the Sand. Again, I wouldn't have thought to buff this card, but it is going from deal 2 damage to a minion to deal 3 damage to a minion. Orange has been fairly weak for a while now, so we're making a few targeted buffs to some of its lesser played cards. Now, Shimmer, I don't know if I would say it's necessarily lesser played, to be honest, of the not immediate things, the Scions, the Armageddon Angels of the world. Shimmer shows up, or had shown up in a number of lists. I know for a fact Petamax was running it for a while in Blue, Orange, Rainbow. It's reasonable. I think it's reasonable. I think that the biggest issue, though, is that it's not that it didn't deal enough damage. Don't get me wrong. Dealing extra damage with it, great. Definitely a buff, obviously. But I think its biggest issue was that the requirements in order to play it. Is this going to change people's minds? Yes, there are things that were X3s that need to go away that you couldn't get with Shimmer before. But I think a lot of it was you needed Shimmer to come down early enough to deal with the X2s before they became X3s, Old Doper. Well, maybe not Old Doper, but because it would have gone from, it would have hit 0, or excuse me, it would have hit 3 health, which now it can conveniently get hit by. But Inked Brawlers, as an example, any of the X2 aggro drops that you wanted to play this as the Rainbow deck because it's not uncommon to struggle against those more aggressive strategies. This is still playable, I think. I mean, obviously it got buffed. If it was playable before, it's going to be playable now. I'll take it. I'm not going to say no. Next one up, as alluded to earlier, and I think this is one that a lot of people are going to be drawn to, is a nerf to Terminal Calculus. Terminal Calculus is going from 6 to 7. So, here's what they have to say. Some more slowing of the Draenei top end. This did leave us with no 6-cost green spells, so we're moving Sanguine Steel to 6, as it's not performed well since it was released. So not really a lot to talk about Calculus in this. It's more like supplementary to Sanguine Steel. I've always felt the Terminal Calculus was fine. I didn't think it was a problem at 6. I didn't think it was a problem before that. But I know a lot of people hated this card. It can be utilized to great effect, including like a one-sided board clear. But because of the hoops you had to jump through in order to make that happen, I always felt it was fair. Especially when it was at 6. At 7, this is like, it's still going to get played. But it just, I don't know. Because it's still going to get played, part of me says that, well, clearly the card was too good before. But was it too good in such a way that it really was that much of a problem? I know there were a lot of people that felt it was. There were a lot of people who would talk about this in chat or in Discord or wherever and say, yeah, this thing should be nerfed. This card is a problem. I was not one of those people. But we're going to have to live in a world where Terminal Calculus costs 7. But I don't hate their love of math, so I don't want it to cease to exist. We'll have to see. But this is one that I would disagree with. I'm not so vehement about it that, oh my god, things are ruined. But it does present some challenges. Next up is Venomfang Mutant, which actually was another one on my list. Compared to the calculus, I'm glad that this one's happening. So Venomfang Mutant's going from a 1-4 to a 1-3. Venomfang Mutant's large defense stat, Venomfang's Mutant large defense stat line, oh boy, we're going to get through this one eventually. Need some water. Alright, let's try that again. Venomfang Mutant's large defense stat line was contributing to rogue aggro strategies being hosed by control decks just a bit too often. Whew, made it through that sentence, good lord. Reducing its health should allow for more clean kills where aggro decks aren't throwing all their bodies to a field of 2 Venomfang Mutants. 100% agree. Venomfang Mutant has been for a very long time the best defensive 2-drop. Now, that's not necessarily a problem, that at least to me, that there is a de facto known quantity as the best control 2-drop. It matters when it oppresses and suppresses all of these aggro strategies. It's not even necessarily rogue aggro strategies, it's just that you could trade a Venomfang Mutant up the curve relatively easily. It might not even trade, and that's the scary part, is that it's getting 2-for-1s, it's getting 3-for-1s, and for only a 2-mana investment, that's incredible. Like, that's just incredible. I think it overshadows other defensive 2-drops as a result, as well as, previously mentioned, crushing these aggressive strategies. It's not even just a matter of rogue strategies, it's a matter of any aggressive strategy I felt was getting beat to a pulp by our mutant spider friend here. How do I think this is going to play out? Well, there's been a number of changes that we've seen that should help also buoy aggressive strategies, and I'm excited that Venomfang Mutant is on the receiving end of a nerf. I've certainly played a lot of it. I would rather that things even out a little bit more on the aggro control spectrum so that things are brought a little bit closer together. I think this is going to provide a lot of opportunities that were not there previously, so that you can properly, if I can get that statement out, remove it and then continue pressuring as the aggro deck, because a lot of that is what it boiled down to. You were able to stop and blunt the aggressive progression and then still continue to do so afterwards because you likely survived. Because realistically, Venomfang Mutant was a 2-4. It just maybe had other things come into play because of the blight. But realistically, it was a 2-4 for 2, which seems wild, especially given the value that it can have play later in the game, even as a chump blocker, against larger things because of the blight. The blight will come into play. So, bottom line, thumbs up. I like this one. And that's actually all the changes. So overall, as we started out, I think this is both a surprisingly large patch and also a very relevant one. I think that there are several strategies that I'm already kind of, the gears are turning, maybe some smoke coming out of my ears as I'm trying to figure this stuff out, but there's a number of things that I'm excited to try out. I would expect that there's going to be more aggressive strategies that are going to make an appearance. I'm curious whether the mythical mid-range deck is going to come in to swallow up the aggro decks, which then gets beat by the later game control decks and rainbow decks and things like that, or how this plays out, because the world of Mythgard still has a lot of potential in it, and I'm very excited to see what people come up with. So as I said at the top, let me know in the comments how you feel about this particular balance patch. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you have things that you're excited about? Do you think that there should have been more done? Less? Whatever it happens to be. If you enjoyed this and you want to see more Mythgard stuff or other content, definitely hit the subscribe button so that you can follow, the good old Chompers guy and Random's thoughts as we produce more content. That'll do it for this time, though, everyone. As always, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and Black Lives Matter.